Good day, class. So for today, our lesson is all about genre. Everybody say genre. When we say genre, as you can see in the picture, this is more on romance, fiction, fantasy, history, knowledge, education, ABCs, biographies, stories, facts, crime, novels, magic, poems, mystery, sci-fi, and many more. Genre is a French word meaning kind or group. We pronounce genre as genre. Alright, not genre. Alright, always remember, pronounce as genre or genre. The two word or the genre refers to a category of artistic, musical, or literary composition characterized by particular style, form, or content. Always remember genre, this is more on artistic, musical, or literary composition. And at the same time, this is more on style, form, or content. As you can see here, there are some apps that are just using genre. For example, action and adventure, comedy, documentary, horror, sci-fi, thriller. Here, we also have alternative, blues, children's, Christians, classical, country, electronic, folk, holiday, Israel, jazz, Latin, pop, pieces, R&B, reggae, rock, soul, soundtrack, spoken, and world. There's a lot of genres, not just for music, but at the same time, even in the stories. And that's what we are going to tackle for today. Literary genres that can be either a fiction, this is more on historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy, realistic fiction, or it can be mystery. But if we're going to talk about non-fiction, the genre is more on biography, autobiography, or informational. For folk tales, we can talk about legend, fable, fairy tale, myth, or tall tale, and at the same time, we can also have the drama and poetry. Here, so literary genres, as I have said a while ago, when we say fiction uses character, settings, and plot to convey events that are not real. Always remember, not real for fiction. For non-fiction, we use real people, setting, and plot to convey actual events. And at the same time, for folk tales, use exaggerated characters and obstacle and have been passed down over generations by word of mouth. For drama, we also have uses characters, dialogue, and action to tell a story through conflict and emotions. For poetry, we use a sound, rhythm, and word choice to convey ideas and emotions or thoughts. Always remember, and at the same time, for biography, this is a non-fiction, writing that is a real person. For informational, this is a non-fiction writing that is about a specific topic, and at the same time, for realistic fiction, a fictional story often set in the person that has believable character, setting, and plot. For fiction, as you can see in the picture, we have here the example that's from Catherine Patterson. That's The Bridge to Terabithia. Fiction is a story based on the imagination of the author. Always remember, imagination of the author. Written to entertain the readers. And at the same time, fiction characterized by a setting, characters' dialogue or talking, and even problem, conflict, and at the same time, the climax and the solution. So how do we classify literature into each genres? So look at the pictures. So we have different examples of genres or stories. Now we have here the genres for the fantasy, romance, adventure, crime fiction, horror, science fiction, mystery, historical fiction, and realistic fiction, and at the same time traditional literature. Always remember, when it comes in genre, they are using conventions. When we say conventions, it's a particular genre includes certain basic ingredients which we call conventions. Convention texts often fit into multiple genres. Always remember, conventions, they are using multiple genres, not just one but more than two genres. For example, can you think of a novel combine science fiction, romance, adventure, and horror? That's all in one, and we call it the conventions. They combine different genres in one. Next one, we have the mystery. Alright, when we say mystery, for example, as you can see in the picture, we have from the Gertrude Chandler Warner, The Mystery on the Train. When we say mystery, this is more on suspenseful stories about a puzzling event that is not solved until the end of the stories. That's why they call it mystery. More on solving stories and issues. Next, we have here the historical fiction. When we say historical fiction, this fictional story that takes place in a particular time period in the past. Historical fictions often the setting is real, but the characters are made up from the author's imagination. For example, The Dream Carvers by John Clark. Next, we have the traditional literature, the famous one. We have the stories that are passed down from one group to another in histories. For example, of traditional literature, we have here the Cinderella. It includes folk tales, legends, fables, fairy tales, tall tales, and myths from different culture, and that is traditional literature. Now we have here the horror. Baddies, supernatural creatures like vampires, victims, believers, and skeptics of the supernatural, innocent children and young women, heroes, saviors, slayers, mad scientists, clever experts. Those are the example of horrors. Horrors can be also isolated places, dark places, cemeteries, good versus evil, revenge, courage, justice, suspense, killing. We have here the example, The Sunglasses After Dark by Nancy Collins. Those are the example of horror. We have here the realistic fiction. When we say realistic fiction, is a story using made-up characters that could happen in real life. That's why they call it realistic fiction. It's because it happened in real life. We have here example of a book or the realistic fiction book. We have here Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo. For fantasy, we have the story including elements that are impossible. Always remember, fantasy, this is more on impossible, such as talking animals or magical powers. Magic users like wizards, royalty like princesses, and real creatures like dragons or heroines. Fantasy is also quest to overcome obstacles, and at the same time, they have enchanted places like castles, forests, and medieval time, and at the same time, this is more on good versus evil, honorable qualities, and at the same time, for friendship and successive volumes. We have here the #1 New York Times bestseller book. We have here The Aragon by Christopher Paolini, and that's the example of fantasy. For science fiction, we have here a type of fantasy that uses science and technology. That's why they call it the science fiction. Science fiction is more on robots, space times, machines, aliens, time travels, and at the same time conflict with invaders and a quest to overcome obstacle. Science fiction set in the future, advanced or regressive. And at the same time, this is more on good versus evil. And at the same time, science fiction focuses on friendship, honorable qualities, and human potential, or it can be ethics. We have here the example of science fiction, The Voyage of the Space Beagle by A.E. Van Vogt. For romance, when we say romance, it's a fictional stories that takes place in a particular time or in a period in the past. For example, of romance is more on love match, overcoming obstacles, becoming a couple, and at the same time a happy ending. For example, here we have the Twilight, and at the same time the Robin de Heart. For crime fiction, it is a fictional story that takes place in a particular time or period in the past. Crime fiction is often the setting is real, but the characters are made up from the author's imagination. Alright? Always remember, for crime fiction, the setting is real, but at the same time, this is more on author's imagination. More on mystery, crime solved by detective involves interpretation of clues, villains, mysterious settings, danger, weapons, and suspense and tension. For example of crime fiction here, we have A Dissection of Murder by Felicity Young. Alright, so as you can see there, the genre codex from the characteristic words by genre, we have here the action, crime, family, horror, mystery, sci-fi, comedy, drama, fantasy, musical, romance, and war. So this list were created finding the top 1,000 most frequently occurring words in each genre's script, and then cutting out all words that exist in more than one other genre's top 1,000. Alright, so that's the genre codex, the characteristic words by genre. Alright, so if you watch this video, students, alright, this is going to be your final project in creative writing. So you will be assigned one genre to research. You are to collect 10 to 15 images, film titles, authors, novel covers, and many others that are classified as part of your assigned genre, and make an electronic collage from your findings. Then answer the following questions. Okay, so what do you think is the genre of that stories, and give at least a short description about that story. Don't forget the format in sending your project in email, in my email or Gmail. So make sure that section and last name and first name, for example, yums11-1 abyog ace, and this is my email. So send your project at asengabyog@gmail.com. Alright, so you have to send that before the end of semester. That's from the first week of January. So this is the example pictures for the project. As you can see there, you have to compile different kinds of stories, books, movies, and then you have to classify them. What genre is that? And then you're just going to give at least a short description. Always remember this project. Right, so you can hear, as you can see, the different or the famous stories and books that we have here. All right, there you go for magic, good versus evil, quest. There you go for romance. You can choose and then just put description and what genre is that. Don't forget to compile everything. It's because that is part of your project. Alright, for horror, we have here different kinds of horror movies and stories, so better make sure to choose. And at the same time, that's our lesson for today. So once again, thank you for listening, and don't forget to do your project.